Hello, everybody. This is Tim here back again with the next Nightmare on Elm Street commentary. This time we're going to hit up a Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Warriors. Now, I decided to use the theatrical cut for Dream Warriors, which not everybody, I don't know if everybody knows this, but there is an unrated version that was actually released on VHS tape way back in the day. But you can only get it today on either the old VHS tape off Amazon or the Laserdisc version. I decided to go with the theatrical cut because that's what most people have is the theatrical cut. So, but if you do have the unrated version, you can watch it. I don't think there's much of a time difference between the two. But anyway, we're going to start the countdown here for Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child. Okay, pressing play in 3, 2, 1, play. Alrighty, let's get this sucker going. We got the New Line Cinema logo coming up here. I decided to go ahead and get into the commentary for part 5 because really I had fun with the commentary for part 4, so I figured what the hell, why not just head straight into 5? It's fun, why not? And if you hear any movement or anything going around or going on or whatever, that's just me kind of adjusting myself in my seat, setting and watching a whole movie for the entire runtime. You have to change positions every now and then. Directed by Stephen Hopkins, who also did Ghosts in the Darkness with Val Kilmer and Michael Douglas. He also did that terrible Hilary Swank movie called The Reaping. He did Lost in Space. I'll be honest, I haven't seen Lost in Space in years. I know it's considered like one of the worst movies ever made, but I never grew up with the original show. I'm not sure if I would hate that movie. I may just think it was okay because honestly, I have no like affinity for Lost in Space. So, it's not really anything to me. He brings a very artistic, like gothic, like old school, like Hammer horror movie style to this film. Even with this opening right here with like the names of the cast written in chalk and like this love sex scene going on, love scene, whatever. It's shot very artistically with this like blue light. It really feels like something you would see on like late night Skinamax or something. But it works. I think it's kind of fun, like because you can't tell whose body part is what, so you're kind of guessing at it. He's kind of going with the idea of like the bodies becoming one and all that here. It's a very like art house, art film, art school type thing that would younger like director would do. I think it's well done. This film also has a good score. I like the gothic tone score of the film. I will say this right off the bat. This is easily one of the Well, let me just say this. Part 1 of Nightmare on Elm Street, if you haven't been listening to my commentaries thus far, is a masterpiece. It is my favorite Nightmare on Elm Street film easily, Part 1. I think it's the best written, most solid script, easily. And part of that's probably just because it's the first, so, it came with the idea the first time over all these other ones. Part 2, I think, is a pretty good, like, gay metaphor B-movie horror possession film, but I think it's a poor A Nightmare on Elm Street film. As in A Nightmare on Elm Street film, it's only, like, okay as a sequel to the original. It's really not that good as a Nightmare on Elm Street film, but as its own movie that's like a possession, gay-themed horror film, it's actually pretty good. Nightmare on Elm Street 3 is a great sequel and is the best actual sequel of the series. I do think New Nightmare is a better film than Dream Warriors, but New Nightmare is so far removed from the Nightmare on Elm Street series, it's its own thing. Part 4 is a really good, fun movie, just in terms of pure fun, just to have a good time. It has a slightly clunky script in places, but overall, it's just extremely fun. And entertainment value matters a lot when it comes to a movie. You can overlook small script problems or even large script problems if you have an extremely entertaining movie. This one, from what I remember, is just kind of alright. It's alright, it's not bad. I don't hate this film, I just think it's alright. But not counting part 2, this is easily the weakest of the first 5. It's alright, though. It has some good visuals and good ideas here, and I do remember some good dream sequences. And Lisa Wilcox, of course, looking beautiful again. She does a great job again in this film. She pretty much carries this one. Well, not counting Robert Englund, of course. Body double in the shower, yes. They wanted to try to go back to more of the horror roots of the original Nightmare on Elm Street with this one, but at the same time, they tried to have Freddy still get a lot of jokes and one-liners and stuff off. But the way the director did it, it doesn't really mesh totally well. because the tone is so dark, and a lot of Freddy's like jokey lines are more in tune with something from part four, really. So they don't really fit this tone of this movie for the most part. So that's where you encounter the problem in the movie. Bathtubs filling up with water. Interesting dream sequence here. As a Nightmare on Elm Street movies, this one is just kind of alright. But as a Freddy Krueger movie, if you go to these films and just judge them as Freddy Krueger films, like if you look at these movies as if Freddy Krueger's the star, and you just judge them as Freddy films and how like his character does things and all that, and like how the creative the dream sequences are and everything, and like tie to Freddy and all that, then actually this is a good special effects movie as a Freddy film. But as a Nightmare on Elm Street film that's supposed to be a horror series, it's only alright, from what I remember. Good atmosphere here, though. It really feels like a very old school, like Hammer horror film type flick. And I like it. I like the vibe of this film with the old, like, school horror flashbacks and stuff like that. Clearly going for something totally different from what part 3 and 4 did, which part 3 was more of a fantasy horror flick, really, with really extremely perfectly balanced comedy and horror. Part 4 was a popcorn movie. But 3 and 4 were in a similar vein of just trying to have more fun with the concept. This film wants to take it back to its roots, but at the same time do it in a different way in execution by adding like a gothic hammer horror film. Like this almost feels like Dracula or something. The way this film is put together with the gothic overtones. Robert Englund in a cameo there, playing his actual father, who's one of the maniacs in the group. That's pretty funny. This film actually did well in theaters when it came out. It made more than its budget, but it's considered a flop by the studio because it didn't like triple its budget or whatever, or quadruple it like part 3 and 4 did, basically, I believe. But it was still actually a hit. It just didn't do as well as they wanted it to. That's the thing about these Nightmare on Elm Street films is each movie really does try to bring you something different. Like, I can see why this film didn't do as well as 3 or 4. After part 3, and especially after part 4, people at the time, audiences, what they really wanted was something in the similar vein. More fantastic dream sequences with Freddy, like, pretty much running the movie and stuff like that. Not too over the top and silly like Freddy's Dead, but just fun. They wanted something more fun. With a more Freddy being like jokey, but not overly jokey, kind of like he was in 3 and 4. Instead, you got a movie that does a complete 180 to the tones of part 3 and 4. So I'm sure when this film came out in 1989, it was extremely jarring to audiences at the time because of what they expected this movie to be after part 3 and 4. Like I can see like mainstream audiences in 1989, like when this came out, like going like, well, that wasn't that good. It's kind of dull, kind of boring because they just don't really want this gothic, somber type toned Freddy movie at the time. They just didn't want it. Nowadays, I think they would probably enjoy it more. But back then, people really did want like the MTV Fun Freddy. They did, and it's understandable. And I think this movie was probably a miscalculation by the studio to try to give them something different. Or thinking that the audiences wanted something different. They should have noticed after the reactions to 3 and 4 that audiences wanted something similar. You could have took the same basic concept of this movie about the dream child and Freddy using the baby's dreams to kill people, and just made this movie more in the vein of 3 and 4 and more fun, and it would have done better, box office wise. Not saying it would have been a better movie or not, because I don't know. I would have to see it, but it would have done better financially with audiences. The movies that tend to be the most like debated in the series, or the ones that fans go back and forth on, are like part two, this one part five, and Freddy's Dead. Those are the three that people who like part two tend to hate like either five or six, and people that hate part two tend to like five but hate six. It just fluctuates. Those are the three that are like the more divided films of the series. 1, 3, 4, and New Nightmare are the ones that people generally like. And even Freddy vs. Jason, most mainstream audiences generally like that film. Even though there's like a minority of fans who really hate that film, most regular audiences really enjoy Freddy vs. Jason. Because they just wanted a fun movie out of the concept. After part 4, if you go into this film wanting more of what you got with that fun, like cool visual type element, or just pure fun element that you got in part 4 with this one, or expecting more of that with this number 5, you're probably gonna not really like this one. However, I believe if you can accept this film for what it is and the different tone and style it's going for, you may like it, or like it more than what you originally did if you were a big fan of part 4. And of course, there's been many years since this movie came out, so nowadays, I'd say most audiences probably could, or even most Freddy fans probably could accept the movie more for what it's doing, which is a complete opposite tone of 4 and even 3. Of course, we got Dan here, who his parents are talking about. This boy feels the need for speed, trying to get him to do sports or whatever, and go to college and on an athletic scholarship and all that crap. I mean, he just wants to be with Alice, which is understandable. She's hot. Of course, we have Alice's father showing up now. I do like this character arc of how they made Alice's father like sober up and everything. I like that. How he has like an actual arc. It's pretty interesting actually. It's good. I like that they did that. Made him a much more likable character than he was in 4. I think I've stated this already, but the interesting thing about the Nightmare on Elm Street films, as opposed to like the Friday the 13th films, or even the Halloween films, is that like all the Nightmare on Elm Street films, they try to do something different. Every single film, they try to deliver something different in tone and feel. The guy who plays Mark in this film, his character starts to become more likable as the film goes along, with how he's trying to help Alice and stuff. But the acting that he gives is pretty wooden and even bad at times. But he does become more likable. You can overlook bad acting if a character is somewhat likable. And honestly, this film probably would have been better if Mark's character would have survived and Yvonne would have died in the movie. It probably would have worked better, because the Yvonne character in this, the swimmer girl, played by Kelly Jo Minter, who also was in a small role in People Under the Stairs, her character is really unlikable in this. Yes, it makes sense that she's in like this super denial about what's going on with the whole Freddy thing and all that, but she's unwilling to listen to anything. She's too hateful, is what it is, which makes her annoying. I like this, how Alice just takes like a stroll through the park to go to work, and she starts like looking over there and seeing the jump rope kids. I like how it like meshes the dream world with reality. That's pretty cool. Of course, the other thing is that poor Dan as a character, he's so bland. They just don't give much to anything for Dan. It would have been cool if we could have seen more from his point of view, And I know, like, arguing with his parents maybe about Alice and how he wants to be with Alice and maybe even marry Alice. You could have really developed Dan here and done more with him to make him a much more interesting character. But they do nothing with Dan. There's really he's so one note as a character. Yeah, beautiful visuals here, like gothic visuals and the whole blue like tent lighting to this in certain shots. Really good visuals in this one. At least for me personally, I really think the gothic visuals look really pretty. Very good on the eye. To me, this was always kind of an alright A Nightmare on Elm Street film. But this time, I think part of that, though, maybe for me, was because I watched the film, like, in context of what 3 and 4 gave me. I think I am one of those people. And I just don't think I meshed well with what this film was doing because I was comparing it to 3 and 4. This time, I think I'm going to try to accept this film for its new direction, for what it's doing, in order to judge it more fairly. And I'm going to see how I feel about this film by the end of it, to see if my mind changes on it a little. I never hated the film. I just thought it was always kind of dull compared to the funness of 3 and 4. But they are going for a much more somber film here, so I'm going to try to judge it for what it is, which is really a gothic horror picture. It's so removed from 3 and 4, or 4 especially, that I don't think you could really even compare it to that movie. We got Amanda Kruger being brought back to life. Now suddenly Freddy can like raise the dead though, or control spirits to make them like give birth to him again. That doesn't quite work as like a rebirth for Freddy. But I like this like mutant Freddy baby we see here or whatever, because it's in the real life Freddy came out looking normal like a normal baby, but of course with this being the dream world, he looks freakish, which is supposed to tie into the fact this is a nightmare. But he looks cool though. In terms of story, Part 2 is the most removed Freddy movie of all these films from what a Nightmare on Elm Street film is really in the series. But in terms of tone and feel, I would say this one is the most removed because this really feels like a gothic horror picture and doesn't feel that much like in a Nightmare on Elm Street film. I like that they brought it back to the same church from the ending of part 4. Not as good of a rebirth as the one from part 4 where his bones go back together and everything and the ground opens up. Not as cool as that one. Compared to that one, this rebirth is just kind of alright. Of course, at the time, this was a rushed production to capitalize on the success of part 4. To me, that was a mistake. They should have took a year off and released this in 1990 with Lisa Wilcox back as the star. Freddy was huge after part 4. I will admit that "It's a Boy" line does make me laugh. I like here at the beginning, though, how they keep Freddy dark and in the shadows. I appreciate that. Of course, here's Freddy's ghost mother. Freddy almost looks like a witch in some of these shots here at the beginning of this opening. Kind of similar to the part 2 makeup, except they're making him look less demonic and more old and witch like, really. Which is kind of funny because this was only a year after part 4. They could have just used similar or the same makeup and just made him look the same, really the exact same as he was in 4. But I believe they made him look older because they wanted to fit more of the gothic like hammer monster tone they got going here. So it would fit in more. It also does seem like Freddy's rebirth is a bit too easy for him to come back to me after that big epic death he got in part 4 by literally losing all the souls he accumulated over all the films up until then. I mean, all he has to do is like resurrect his mother to come back. That's a little easy if he can just do that. Meanwhile, back at the graduation pool party, I also think at this point the series had started to like show its hand a little bit. It started to become more standard and slightly more rote because by this point, by the fifth entry, you kind of know what they're doing and you know what you're getting into. They have to establish what all the victims like and what their interests are, their fears are, so Freddy can use it against them. So it's kind of by the time you get to a fifth movie in any franchise, the series starts to feel a little played out, and it doesn't. I don't think it matters what the series is. Of course, Mark the comic book guy does not like blood. The guy who comes out here and like nudges Dan and says, "Hey Dan, telephone in the office now." He's acting like it's such a big urgent thing to him for some reason that Dan gets the phone. I mean, the guy looked like a coach or something. I don't know. It always seemed to be funny to me that this guy's trying to hurry up and get Dan in there to get on the telephone. I mean, maybe Alice said it was an emergency. I don't know. This is pretty funny when Dan's mother comes on the radio here while he's driving in the truck and starts talking bad about Alice. And of course, it switches to Freddy speaking then. That's pretty funny. Freddy taking over the truck. Freddy ripping his own arm off used to kind of annoy me because it used to just kind of come out of the blue. Or just felt like something they randomly threw in, but now it doesn't really bother me. It's kind of funny. He used his arm as a seatbelt, but he does have too many one-liners in that sequence where he's in the truck. He says, "Bad year, Dan," and then he goes, "Better buckle up, dear." He kind of overdoes the one. They're overdoing the one-liners slightly here by giving him a little bit too many. Like in the last film, Part 4, it was overall a fun movie, and Freddy was shown in more light and stuff like that, but they still didn't overdo it with the one-liners. Here they're overdoing it with the one-liners. That's the mistake here. But I think Robert Englund's still doing a great acting job, even in this fifth film by now in the series. But his writing is they're overdoing it with the one-liners. If they cut it down to just like two or maybe even one in the sequences, it wouldn't be a problem. Really good special effects work here with the motorcycle merging with Dan's body, which of course if you've seen the unrated version, you know there was a little bit more to the sequence. They're still slightly overdoing it with the one-liners. He does like four one-liners right here in this one sequence of him transforming Dan into combining him with the motorcycle. There's just too many. course, in real life, Dan wrecks in his truck and dies, which is his actual death. Freddy calls him to run into a truck. Dan speaking in Freddy's voice, possessed for a couple seconds. Of course, that's another thing. Like, why is Dan speaking in Freddy's voice all of a sudden? Alice is not asleep, and Freddy was not shown possessing Dan, so that kind of comes out of nowhere. These later films, they start to really fudge the rules of what Freddy really can and can't do. Part 2 does it the most, but these later sequels, even Part 4, which is really fun, slightly muddles the lines of what Freddy can and can't do in the real world. Like sending a picture with him and Kristen saying, "See you in hell," or whatever it said in that movie, or "Greetings from hell." I believe Freddy has always been able to slightly affect the real world to certain extents in these movies since the first one. But some of the later sequels kind of make it a little iffy on what exactly he can do or can't do. The interesting thing about the ending of this film is they don't even actually kill Freddy. Freddy does not die in this movie. He's just captured, which is a very interesting way to end this flick. Like, there's no death for Freddy in the end of this movie. He's beaten, but they don't kill him. They just capture him to try to keep him at bay. Like, his mother absorbs him so she can keep him at bay so he can't come back. Which, of course, doesn't work because there's more movies after this. But yeah, you get what I'm saying. Like, there's no, unlike the first four, there's no Freddy death in this one. I wonder if they actually did that. Like, they didn't even bother killing off Freddy because they knew that they would probably eventually do another sequel, so they wanted to just like be able to bring him back and not have to come up with some way to revive him again like they did in this one. I like the idea for the story of this film, though. So far, despite some problems, this is a decent movie, a decent Nightmare on Elm Street movie for me. It's not terrible. It's not as good as 4 or 3 or 1, but it's decent. Of course, Alice's unborn son here in a child form is his spirit in the dream world, which Freddy has made to look like what he will be when he gets a little older. That way he can communicate with him. Of course, Freddy can't really talk to a fetus. So Freddy aged him up with his powers in the dream world. And one of the other drafts for this script, I think there was something called like the Dream Pool or whatever. And I've read some other drafts of this movie like online on the Nightmare on Elm Street Films website. There was an idea in one of the drafts to have like Jacob as like an older teen kid who appeared in like the real world to come help Alice, like research Freddy Krueger and all that, and they were able to like go dive into this dream pool thing and stuff to like find information about Freddy's past and shit. And this movie was much more in its original drafts, much more about like the real issues that they kind of just bring up in this one, but kind of gloss over like bulimia and stuff with the Greta character in the original, like more darker drafts, she was gonna like get raped in a room or whatever by this guy who was pretended to be like a model, like agency dude or something, and and Freddy appeared in her nightmare and turned her into a pig and stuck her with his claws. It was much more hardcore and dark and edgy in the original drafts for this movie, and they made it much more mainstream, and they did water it down from what it was to make it more of a selling point to the masses. Because at this point, Freddy was like a household figure. You know, he was the fun character. They didn't want to go too hardcore dark with it, but I do think if they had went with that original draft that had like Greta be like abused by some model agency guy and like turned into a pig and shit, that could have made this a really hardcore dark Freddy movie. Also, in that script, they had Alice go much more like into like the whole issues of what Amanda Kruger did by giving Freddy up, and they really went into like Alice's character and how she blamed Amanda Kruger somewhat for what Freddy became. They didn't make it wasn't too preachy, but at the same time, I think it would have added some drama to the movie that it's kind of missing from the film we get, which feels more safe and kind of watered down. Like in the draft, it was more like Amanda Kruger like blamed herself or something like that for how Freddy turned out, because if she would have kept him and raised her herself, he would have been a better person. He wouldn't have wound up being a killer. It's his upbringing from his abusive childhood homes and all that shit, and his slightly mental damage, of course, being the product of a child of rape that turned him into what he was. But if he would have had a better upbringing, he wouldn't have turned into what he did. And that was kind of the big thing in the original drafts for this movie. It was more about like the abortion issue, and not so much the abortion issue, but more about like the deeper themes that the movie goes for about children and all that. And I guess that probably would have made it stronger by the climax when Amanda Kruger actually takes Freddy back and puts her inside her body so she can keep him at bay. It would have added more weight to that because she would have felt guilty about what Freddy turned into, and she would have tried to like redeem herself by keeping Freddy at bay. So that would have added more drama to it, you know. But what we do get is just kind of a watered down version of what the original drafts are. But for what it is, at this point the movie's okay. We're getting the standard. Let me tell you about this Freddy guy again and all that and everything he's done. Which by the fifth movie, the audience knows what's going on. I don't know if it was that draft I was talking about or another draft, but I believe Alice actually met her new friends and stuff like that because she went to like an institution or something, where she met all these new teenagers and stuff. And the Mark character was actually a girl, and she was killed by her artwork coming to life in her room. Like all her paintings and stuff and all that came to life and attacked and killed her. Instead, when they finally rewrote it into this version, it is her. It is his. They changed. Well, Mark's a boy in this one. It is his comic books instead of like the artwork. I think the artwork thing actually probably would have been cooler. Like seeing Freddy like make all the artwork in the room come to life and just attack. That would have been some wild animation. The comic like style of death we get here is kind of neat, but part of me wonders if that artwork death would have been cooler. And I also think John Saxon's character, if I remember right, he had like a brother in that draft who was trying to help the kids, and Freddy like wound up killing him by turning into a friggin' traffic cop and like pulling him over. And the guy thought it was really a cop, and then Freddy killed him. A lot of interesting ideas in these other drafts of these movies, especially like the weaker ones like this one and Freddy's Dead, that could have made like much more interesting films if they would have went with that. Of course, we got the Greta death coming up here, which is I like this death. It's better in the unrated version. What's funny is I only watched the VHS tapes of these movies for years, and I had no idea there was like an unrated version and and a theatrical version. I had no idea there was a difference because all I had was the unrated version on VHS, so that was the only one I was used to. And when I finally watched this on DVD, I was like, "What the hell? Why is this scene different?" And then I found out what actually happened. Like they still own like the prints and stuff and the cuts that were taken out of the theatrical version that are in the unrated version. They still own the prints of the unrated one, but New Line Cinema or whatever just has not. They just haven't released it. I don't really know why. Why they haven't redone this one and released the unrated version on Blu-ray. I'm sure we'll eventually get it when Scream Factory probably does its own box set somewhere down the line. But at the same time, I have no idea why it's not been done yet. Of course, Greta's mom looks like a character from Beetlejuice almost. course, we get Freddy saying his standard line and cutting into the doll. Freddy making it look like she's choking in real life. I like this special effects sequence right here when all the food in the refrigerator melts. It's like stop motion, but stop motion has a real charm to it. And then Greta like comes out of the refrigerator. Alice is able to sense the dreams because the baby's still inside of her body, so they're connected, so she can like sense what the baby's dreaming about. If you look on the refrigerator, it's got a Freddy Krueger magnet on it, which is pretty funny. Yeah, that was a decent kill. Greta's kill was decent. Dan's death was actually, I liked it better. It was good. The deaths here are more about like the special effects and stuff, and not really about like him just like obliterating the characters and actually killing them. It's more about like the just showing off the effects of transforming the people and stuff. But so far, both Dan and Greta have been very one-note characters in this flick. Lisa Wilcox is pretty much carrying the movie. She did kind of similar in part four, but part four still had Rick, and even Sheila played a good nerd. Her character was a good basic nerd. The actress had charm to her, and of course she still had the three Dream Warriors as well. And even the new Kristen did good acting wise for what she was supposed to be. This cast here feels the most one note and dull character wise of all the first five films. You see, like in this sequence right here, when the guy that plays Mark, he's like, "Get out!" or whatever, talking to Yvonne because he's mad at her. His acting is very wooden and too bad, but he still becomes more likable as the movie goes along. To the point, honestly, where him and Alice are the only two characters I actually like. The interesting thing here is that Freddy's Dead is a sequel to these first five films, even though it's like set so far into the future, it's really its own thing. So whatever happened after Dream Child up until Freddy's Dead is completely unknown in the franchise, unless you count like Freddy's Nightmares, but that's kind of like loose canon because they kind of contradict some of the timeline of the movies. But anyway, just looking at the film franchise, we have no idea what happens between 5 and 6. That's like a 10-year gap between this movie and part 6 timeline wise. So we have no idea what happens to Alice's character after this movie. Like her story gets completely unfinished, which is really a shame because she's easily the best developed hero of the Nightmare series. Like, I know a lot of people like Nancy a lot, and I do too, but it's mostly because Nancy was in the best films. She had the best um, work to work with, the best scripts, the best material. But Alice is easily, the actress is a better actor than Heather Langenkamp from part 1 and 3. I do think Heather Langenkamp in New Nightmare is a better actor than Lisa Wilcox is in this part 4 and 5. But at the same time, in New Nightmare, Heather's playing herself. She's just playing her. I mean, she's not playing a real character. And development wise, the Alice character is far better developed in the fourth and fifth film than what Nancy was in 1 and 3. So yeah, we're finally got a scene with the Elm Street house here, which is really interesting because the Elm Street house has not really even been in this one, from what I remember. But I like that they finally bring it back. They kind of swap out the Elm Street house for the mental asylum in this one to, of course, use the asylum to go more with the gothic tone, which I understand from the director's point of view. But at the same time, though, I did kind of miss the Elm Street house, so it's nice to see it again here. Mark, of course, is hanging down in a hole in the floor, which they actually repeat in Freddy's Dead for some reason. I like that Alice's powers have grown, though, between 4 and this one. Like, she actually uses her dream powers to draw herself on the sketch pad or whatever that where it shows Mark going into the Elm Street house. She's able to like sense his dream, and she draws herself on the piece of paper, and then concentrates and puts herself into his dream, which is pretty cool. Like, Alice is really like powered up in terms of dream powers. They still could have done a lot with that with a sequel to this. In this film, though, if you notice, her character is much more toned down. She doesn't really have a lot of that like toughness, really badassery that she had in part 4. She's much more toned down here. She has some of it later on in the movie when she like rams a poker through Freddy's mouth and comes out the side of his head and like pins him to a wall. She has a little bit of it there, and even at the end of the movie when she like rams Freddy in the back with the demonic baby carriage, she has some of that here, but not much. She's much more toned down. Part of that, the reason that's done is because Stephen Hopkins wanted to make, like I said, a much more gothic, somber Nightmare on Elm Street, so he really tones down like the more action vibes that Rennie Harlan had in Part 4, which really tones down Alice's character because she was like an action hero in Part 4. So she's been really toned down here, but I think for the most part it works for what they're going for here in part 5. I mean, if she was more action and more like she was in part 4, I don't think it would really mesh as much with the tone of this movie. Not for what they're going for. Of course, we got Jacob here again, and I like his line here where the kid goes, my friend with the funny hand told me that my mother doesn't like me. So that's pretty funny. Of course, if you hear a dog barking in the background, that's because where I got a dog, a family dog, and it normally barks at anything and everything that's outside. So if you hear it barking in the background, that's just the annoying family dog. I like the sequence though where Mark like looks at his hands after he gets saved from the hole in the floor, and he's like, "Oh shit," and it falls backwards and wakes up in the real world. That's pretty funny. Yeah, like I'm saying, like the Mark character is starting to become more likable now. This movie would have been better if he would have lived as well as Alice instead of Yvonne. It would have made this movie somewhat better. I think we're already almost like halfway through this one. This Nightmare on Elm Street film really feels like much shorter than part 3 and 4. I don't know if it really is, but it does feel like it goes by faster than 3 and 4. 4 does kind of seem like it goes by somewhat quick because it's so fun, but at the same time, that one really feels like an epic. This one feels much more, like I said, somber. Now she's going to go check on her baby. Yvonne also happens to work at the hospital. I guess she's like some kind of aide or something at the hospital, or nursing student or something. The interesting thing about this one is that Freddy's using the unborn baby, Jacob, who is Alice's baby, to bring in more victims, just like he used Alice for in part 4. Now, that's pretty much the same story as what we got in 4. It's just now it's the kid he's using. Really, though, it's surprising they didn't really go with the idea of just like Freddy, like turning the baby into him, like giving the baby souls and stuff, like so he could like put himself inside the baby to be born in reality or something to like bring his dream powers with him. That idea seems like it would make more sense in the context of this one. So he could be like a living, breathing killer again, but also have his dream powers. That feels like more of what this like Antichrist, baby idea would probably be if they were since they're going for like more of that gothic horror tone. But that's not what they do. They pretty much just repeat the story of part 4, except he's using the baby this time instead of Alice, which of course is another way to go. I don't blame the movie for that, but maybe the whole like becoming the baby story or whatever would be more interesting. They also missed out on some what could be some fun like nightmare sequences in this. Like it would have been cool if Freddy gave Alice like a nightmare of her like having her baby, but instead of the baby coming out, like the claw burst through her stomach and stuff. That would have been some cool imagery. I like how she's getting absorbed into her own sonogram. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I like that she's inside of her own body. This is a decent effect. Yeah, at this point, the movie's decent. It's not bad, not good, decent. I like Freddy's line here, too. See any family resemblance? Robert Englund's still doing a good job. He's not in this film as much as the other ones. At least it doesn't feel that way at this point in the movie. Of course, the doctor is calling the grandparents to let them know about Alice like freaking out and stuff and having weird nightmares and all that. Which you really can't do that if you're a doctor in real life. You're breaking like the HIPAA laws and all that. I will say this: at this point, this film is a bit too somber. It does need some more fun slasher movie sequences. I get it what they're doing. The director wants to go for a more dramatic, like somber story, not just for the gothic horror element, but also to fit in with the theme of the baby and all that. And he's trying somewhat to make this a somewhat serious movie about women's pregnancy issues, but that doesn't really fit what a slasher movie is. Slasher movies are supposed to be somewhat fun, no matter how dark they are. Even the first film, with how dark it is, it's way darker than this movie. It's still fun. This movie is much more trying to have like some dramatic baby story thing. You don't need to go that direction with a Freddy Krueger movie. And if you are going to go that direction, you still need some more entertaining like slasher movie moments. Another thing is if you actually like pause on one of the paper clippings right here that Alice has about Freddy's like past and all that, one of them actually says child molester set free, which is to tie into the fact that Freddy was supposed to be a child molester. Now, the whole child molestation thing, I think I mentioned this before, and maybe the commentary for part one, it was pretty much took out of the films, or at least it wasn't took out, but it wasn't said outright. But the subtext of it is kept in the movies. Like if you watch these movies and you see how Freddy acts towards these characters who are supposed to be teenagers, technically still kids, you can tell he's a really sick pervert. So you get the idea of what this character was supposed to be. They don't really need to say it outright. It's enough of it there to where you can tell. Even when I was a kid, Freddy felt like a child molester to me. Like he felt like a pervert, a sicko. I was never someone who rooted for the Freddy character. I've always heard people say that some fans did that or whatever, but I've never really encountered any fan that rooted for Freddy. Like I like Freddy and I think Freddy is super entertaining, but he is the villain. Like in this movie, I am rooting for Alice. I'm more entertained by Freddy in the film because I know it's fictional and he's not real. But at the same time, from a story standpoint, I'm still rooting for Alice over Freddy. I was never rooting for Freddy in this movie or any of these movies. Even though I still think Freddy is the star of this franchise, just like Jason's the star of his series, I was never rooting for him or Jason in any of those movies. Well, except for Freddy versus Jason, where I was actually rooting for Jason to beat Freddy, because of course Jason is the lesser of two evils between the two. I like this sequence here though, where Dan's parents are actually like wanting to take the baby. It does feel a bit weird that they're trying to go this dramatic for a slasher flick. Uh, but it does. It is. I am glad they actually tried it and just approached it. I like the fact that Alice's dad takes up for her as well. I like that. This is a good moment. I like the fact that Alice stands up for herself, how she's not giving up her baby. Yeah, it's a good sequence. It is understandable though why the grandparents feel the way they do. They don't want nothing to happen to the baby, and of course their son is dead, so they want to keep some part of him around. It's understandable why they're going this direction because they're panicking and all that. Of course, here's where they mention Amanda Kruger committed suicide, so her soul is like bound to the earth or whatever, or isn't able to rest, which I guess explains why she was wandering around in part three. Her grave is empty. There's no body. So they never found her body, which begs the question, how the hell did they know she committed suicide? I guess they just speculated. But it is kind of a weird line, though, that they would. How the hell did they speculate she committed suicide if they never had a body? I do like the fact though that they need Amanda Kruger's help in this movie to defeat Freddy. That is kind of neat, bringing back the Freddy mother character. But it would be better if they actually had like some interaction with Amanda, like they did in like those original scripts. I would have liked it better, original drafts. I mean, I would have liked it better if they actually did get more inside Amanda's head and how she feels about Freddy and whether or not she blames herself because she's the one that gave him up. That would have been some interesting drama. Really don't have much more left in this one. It's about the it's about near the climax almost. Yeah, I like the visual look of like the swinging lights and stuff in the Weston Hills Mental Asylum. That's pretty cool. Mark has a great comic book collection. I would love to have these comics. Of course, most of these would be worth a lot today. Of course, Yvonne has fallen asleep in the jacuzzi. And as someone who does not like the Yvonne character, I'm rooting for Freddy to kill her. So at this point in the movie, I guess I am actually rooting for Freddy because I don't like this character. Decent effect right there though, where she dives down into the pool and like goes through this little hole and then comes up into Freddy's world underneath the water. That's pretty cool. Freddy's one-liners are pretty weak in this one. A lot of them are. Not all of them, but some of them are. Like he just said, "Let's rock and roll," and she actually like rolls across the wall. That's pretty corny. Like the one-liners were much better handled in 4 and 3. Much better written. Yeah, there she goes. She rams like poker, like a pull net thing or whatever into his mouth. That was pretty cool. Of course, Freddy can't like leave the area and come in after them because he's afraid of his mother's ghost. Is basically what they're saying right here. Her spirit has power. It's kind of weird that Freddy's afraid of his mother. I guess maybe they're trying to say her spirit has power because she was a nun. So maybe she has like, spiritual power, but they never really clarify it. So it's like, why the hell is Freddy afraid of his mother? Comic book death. I like how the comic has like all the stuff that's been happening so far in the movie in it. That's pretty cool. Of course, now Mark is sucked into the comic book world, which is pretty cool. I like how it's black and white. It's a neat idea bringing Mark into a comic book. It's a good idea for the film. I do not like Freddy riding on a skateboard here that actually has like claws on it. Maybe that was an attempt to do a Freddy skateboard merchandise thing, but that's too cheesy. The movie was at a good point right here with at this point with doing the cool comic book world or whatever inside a comic, but the skateboard thing that brought it back down to just a passable movie. We'll see by the end though how I feel about this flick as a whole. I like how he turns Greta into a doll though, and he's like messing with her stomach and going, "Is she delicious or am I crazy?" That's pretty damn funny. I do like this. Some people could probably see this as corny when he turns into the Phantom Prowler and starts talking like an old-fashioned superhero and shooting Freddy. But at the same time, though, I think it's kind of neat because the kid likes comics, and this is would be his dream power. Logically, would be turning into his own personal superhero, which he created, the Phantom Prowler. So I like that. I think it's kind of neat. It fits in with like the whole Dream Warriors concept. I don't even mind Super Freddy. Like really, I know some people hate the Super Freddy thing, and I get it. It is kind of cheesy, but at the same time, it fits with what Freddy does to like counter his victims' dream powers. Like Mark has become a dream warrior, and Freddy logically turning into a more powerful superhero like Superman, except Super Freddy, that makes sense as a way to counter his abilities. So, in my opinion, yeah, it may be cheesy, but it makes sense in the context of the sequence for me. Yeah, I like Mark's death. So far, I would say his comic book death is my favorite in the movie. Like I said, if you hear any moving, similar to my part 4 commentary, I believe I mentioned it as well. That's just me moving around because honestly, my ass starts to hurt after being sitting for a while watching a movie in the place I'm at here in my house. They pretty much know how to try to stop Freddy is to find Amanda, so they already know the solution to the problem. Really, though, Alice did not even need to go to sleep here at this climax, which is now what we're heading into. She could have just went with Yvonne, and they could have just found Amanda Kruger and then let Amanda Kruger go off into the dream world and do her thing. It's like she feels the need to go off and distract Freddy so he can't get to Jacob to use him again, but at the same time, though, none of her friends are asleep. There's only one left, Yvonne, and she's not asleep, so she doesn't really have anything to worry about. But of course, they did that because they want a showdown with Alice and Freddy for the climax. They have to have it. They need something like that. Of course, that's another good gothic style visual. Like Alice is sleeping there on her bed, and then she like her eyes open, and behind her or whatever is the dream world now instead of like her room. Pretty cool effect. I like how badass Alice is. She's tougher than the Nancy character in terms of like pure just like badassery, which is I think why I've always preferred Alice to Nancy, honestly. Even though I do get why people or a lot of people do like Nancy the best. She was in the best films, so that makes sense. Pretty much, in this film, Freddy wants to make Jacob similar to himself and make him be his friend and all that, so he can just live through his dreams for the rest of eternity, using him to like, or as long as Jacob's alive, just using him as a vessel to bring in more and more victims. Makes sense. Freddy can't get to the new kids; he needs somebody to bring them, just like he did Allison for. Makes sense. Here's another hole for this movie. Yvonne finds Amanda Kruger's like place of death or whatever way too fast and way too easily. Now I get it. You don't want to spend like 30 minutes of her walking around this gothic castle looking thing or whatever, closed down wing of Weston Hills trying to find Amanda Kruger's body or ghost or whatever. But at the same time, it's still too quick. This is a cool sequence right here where Alice rams the demonic baby carriage into Freddy's back. Pretty badass. And I like the design for the carriage too. And once again, I like how it shows Alice as a badass. They really could have had like a Alice trilogy if they would have done one more of these with her character. It is a shame that she never comes back to the franchise because her character's arc is a huge loose end for this series. And part six takes place really far in the future. Um, it never explains how Freddy's suddenly able to go into everyone's dreams now and he no longer needs somebody to bring him victims. I mean, you could have written something to come up with to explain that. I suppose you could say maybe Freddy killed Alice, and when he absorbed her soul, that gave him her dream powers. So he was able to go into anyone's dream now because he has her powers, where she can bring anyone into the dream world. Of course, Freddy gets ripped up by these inmates here, and because this is like where Amanda Kruger has power, but it never explains once again why the hell Amanda Kruger has power. Now we're with Freddy and Jacob. This is pretty much the climax of the movie. At this point, decent film. Some good visuals, one or two mini one-liners. Some of the one-liners are flat, they don't work, but decent. Sorry about that cough. I got strangled on a drink. Of course, we have Freddy with a big hunch in his back for some of this here, running around trying to catch Jacob. I like that Alice doesn't fall for Freddy, like trying to pretend to be Dan or whatever at the end here. At the same time, it takes her a few seconds before she realizes it's not Dan. She probably should have known that right off the bat. Like, I like though that she doesn't fall for that when Nancy did in part 3, when Freddy disguised himself as her father. I do kind of like that they have like a dream center here that's kind of taken from MC Escher, which was also done in Labyrinth. Of course, here's where you find out like Freddy is like hiding out in Alice's body, which begs the question of why. I mean, Jacob says that's how he found him, but why the hell has he been hiding in Alice's body? This feels similar to part 2. Freddy comes out of Jesse's body. Good effect though with Freddy like coming out of her body though. At this point, for anybody that's listening to this commentary, this movie's passable at this point. Yeah, really too easy to find Amanda Kruger's body, but at our spirit behind this wall. But at the same time, I guess part of me is glad we didn't have to spend 30 minutes hunting her down inside the castle or Weston Hills Tower or whatever. I do like the idea though that Freddy's mom does come to help to try to stop Freddy. I like that. I do kind of like that Jacob uses Freddy's own power that he gave him against him. The souls pulling out of Freddy's body here, though, on like umbilical cord type things or whatever, is a little bit too similar to the souls trying to escape in part 4. It's almost like they tried to redo that slightly because it was such a cool effect in part 4. The series is starting to feel watered down by this point in the franchise. I like that Freddy's mother absorbs him back inside of herself, though. I actually do like that. Now that Freddy's been weakened. Great shot here of Freddy trying to like escape Amanda Kruger's body and the doors closing and it being blowed open or whatever by Freddy trying to escape. Really cool shot. Yeah, cool visual. This movie still has some cool visuals. Most of the Nightmare films do have pretty good visuals. I'd say 4 had the best so far. Alice in the park with the baby having a picnic. Of course, we have to have a scene to show that Freddy is technically still alive or will come back for the next movie. Which I never really understood why they did that for all these flicks. You really didn't need to. I mean, Freddy's supernatural. It's not that hard to believe that he would just come back in some way, shape, or form in the sequel. Yeah, another standard Nightmare on Elm Street ending with the kids like playing jump rope, in the foreground or whatever, while Alice is having a peaceful picnic with her father and her friend Yvonne. To just kind of let you know that that he is still partially alive, that he can come back. Which I don't really think you need that. I mean, I don't think you do. It's just kind of, at this point in the series, by doing this for the 5th time in a row, it's just kind of slightly it's just kind of slightly played out. That's one of the problems with this movie. The franchise is just kind of played out at this point. But after watching this, it's not a bad movie. I actually liked it more than I did in the other times I've seen it. I used to think this movie was just all right. Watching it now, it's decent. This is a decent film. It's a decent Freddy Krueger slasher film. We don't get a Freddy death scene at the end. Instead, we just get a Freddy defeat, and he gets sealed inside his mother's body so she can try to keep him prisoner so he can't get out and kill more people or do more damage or whatever. So Freddy isn't even killed at the end. He's just imprisoned, which is different. I'll give it that. It's different. After 4 movies or 5 or whatever, counting this one, I'm okay with doing something different like that for the ending. Yeah, altogether, this was a decent watch. I don't hate this movie. I'd give it a 2.5 out of 4. Not an all right movie, not an all right 2.5, but a decent 2.5. I liked it. I don't love it. It's decent. It kind of falls closer to that like kind of fine range where it's just fine. But yeah, it's a decent movie. I liked it. It's a shame that Alice's character never gets to come back for part 6. They really should have finished her arc off, because what we do get in 6 is a huge letdown after all the character build they've done with Alice for 2 movies, and her being Freddy's most powerful adversary. Not seeing her final battle with Freddy, it was is a friggin' huge mistake for this series. But yeah, altogether a decent film. Shame that the Alice character never got to go on. Maybe someday somebody will make some kind of animated movie or something, or prequel or something that deals with Alice. They could have even passed the power to. They could have even passed the lead to Jacob and just had a Jacob versus Freddy movie. But they didn't. They wasted Alice's character, and we get what we get in Freddy's Dead, which I'll get to. Which I don't hate that film, but it's not good. So, thank you guys for listening to this commentary if you've been here this whole time, and I will see you again with Freddy's Dead.